Greetings. I trust you had a fruitful day. I do not say happy, I say fruitful. Namo tassa bhagavato harahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato harahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Homage to the Buddha, the blessed, noble, and fully self-awakened one. It's not that I don't wish you had a happy day. It's just that happiness comes and goes, but we can make it fruitful through our spiritual practice. I just want to quote from one or two emails that came through concerning our subjects. Harold writes, I was on retreat last summer near Glastonbury. That was organized by Gaia House. And walking out in the evening, I discovered nearby was a cemetery. So a couple of evenings I went and sat there and studied the gravestones, reflecting on how many had died before my current age, nearly 69. And how their bodies would now have rotted down to skeletons. However, I feel that experience was probably too comfortable to be really effective. That probably had to wait a meditation first thing in the morning, shortly after the first recommendation to socially distance. That probably had to wait until await a meditation first thing one morning, shortly after the first recommendation to socially distance, when the potential impact of the events I had been attending up to then suddenly hit me with waves of panic, which no account of rationalization on actual probabilities of anything happening to me could calm. So I just sat with it that morning and the next morning, and it slowly subsided, but not fun while it was happening. So that's when death strikes, when we feel the horror that we feel of serious sickness and death, you see. That horror, that sickness is the measure of this false idea of who I am, this self. He also then goes on to say that it was good to hear your reminiscences of frugality. I can remember about 1960 being tasked with cleaning the grate in my grandfather's house and carefully laying the fire for the evening with paper twists when my parents were staying there. When my parents bought their own house in the mid-60s, this had partial central heating, which heated the ground floor and their bedroom on the first floor, but not mine. Well, I wasn't there all the time. This meant in the winter, I would crawl out of bed and switch on the electric fan heater and then get back into bed until the room temperature was high enough for a morning wash to be considered. Softy. So there we are, a bit of frugality. I mean, these days, people wander about in midwinter in their shirts and blouses with the house at, 24, 26 degrees as if they were living on the Mediterranean. Terrible. There's a little email here from May, and she spent time in Japan at Bukokuji, a training monastery there with her teacher. But there was a monk there from Chile called Chiku-san. He had traveled by foot alone in India and became ill with fever. He was in a village, he doesn't know where exactly, and had begun to accept that he would die. However, a herdsman brought him to his hut and treated him with what he believed was cow's urine, and he recovered after a week or so. There we are. It's meant to be fermented, so any germs or anything like that in it would hopefully be destroyed. But according to Ayurvedic medicine, it's Gaumutra, that's what they call it. It contains nitrogen, sulfur, phosphate, sodium, manganese, iron, silicon, chlorine, magnesium, maleic, citric, and taric acids, and calcium salts, vitamins A, B, C, D, and E, minerals, lactose, enzymes, creatinine, hormones, and gold acids, whatever that is. And it says that the urine is actually similar to the human body in some way. So an old Ayurvedic medicine, and it seems to have cured this this Zen monk from Chile. So there we are. So those are just a little bit of replies, but I must say that yesterday evening I didn't really stress enough that it's an occasion to begin, to test our powers of renunciation and what happens when you renounce something. And for a Dharma teacher not to be teaching that is terrible. And I gave myself very poor marks, but I'm going to make up for it now, you see. So remember that the whole of the spiritual life could be said to be renunciation. And we're not talking about self-mortification. We're not talking about blaming and beating ourselves up. We're talking about seeing where we get caught up with desire, with reaction, wrong desire, of course. And this is just an opportunity. If we find ourselves, for instance, out of work, furloughed, or our wages reduced or whatever, it is an opportunity to let go of certain things. Some of us may still be in job, but we can't fly anywhere, we can't go anywhere, we might be isolated, although I prefer the word secluded. And of course, we have to let go of certain desires that come up through our past habits. And it allows us to sort of sit with them and just feel their energy, feel their power. And the important thing is to stay, if you can, till the very end of that feeling, because right at the end of that feeling, there's a switch, there's a change, there's a sense of being relieved, a sense of relief from that grip. The more the grip, the more the relief. And then you get that sense of peacefulness, you see. And remember that in that process of the energy is being transformed. Nothing is lost. So whatever energy was caught up in that turbulence of desire, wrong desire, will then turn into pure energy, which can be used elsewhere. So given a given situation, it may manifest as love, compassion, joy, or just being peaceful, just being calm. So don't miss this opportunity. Every time you feel you want something, really, check it and stomp on it and say, yes, this is a desire. Now let me have a look at it. Let me feel it. And then, by renouncing those things that we have to renounce anyway. And this is the whole point. In a situation like this, you find yourself having to renounce stuff. So you may as well make spiritual capital from it, if you'll excuse the expression. Yes, and baths, giving up baths. Somebody's given up having hot baths. There we are. I mean, remember in the old days, medieval days, you only had one bath a year. Yes, it was taken in May or thereabouts. And you only had one big tub where, first of all, your dad got in, and then your mum, and then all the kids from the eldest to the youngest. And then that's where we get the phrase, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. So you know what the water must have looked like by the time they'd had their baths. Right up until, I think it was the 80s, somewhere around about there. People were happy just having a shower a week, a bath a week. Now we find that very difficult. Now you have to have a shower every day. But actually, you don't. You don't need a shower every day. By the way, that's why most marriages took place in June, as before they, I suppose, people began to stink a little. So you can look at your lifestyle, and just see what's actually necessary. What is actually necessary, and then you can add a little bit on top of that, maybe. But we're beginning to define what our indulgences are. It's funny how we need things just because we have them, but you don't need many things that we have. Yeah. So I'm putting that aside now, and I am continuing to resolve to talk about the Eightfold Path and to answer the question as to that. But I do want to sidetrack a bit. And I've gone and left my books. Oh, heavens. You have to excuse me just 1 second. 1 second. I just want to take a reading, really, that the Buddha began his teachings. There's a whole discourse here, the Arya Pariyesana Sutta, the discourse on the noble search, where the Buddha tells his life story, you might say, up until, or how he became fully liberated. And it gives you some idea of the person, you know, how he was. So he said, when I was staying at Uruvela, as long as I chose, so that's where he became fully liberated. That's sort of close to, or they think is, present-day Bodh Gaya. Some of you will have been there. I set out to wander by stages to Benares. So that's present-day Varanasi on the Ganges there. Between Gaya, so that's the town near Bodh Gaya, and the place of enlightenment, the Ajivika Upaka saw me on the road. Now, the Ajivikas belonged to a sect that were fatalists, really. You could call them that. They had, I've got it written down somewhere. I can find it. Makali. Just trying to remember all these names. It's sort of, you know, it's terrible. Makali Gosala, who was a fatalist. Everything was predestined. There were many of these, remember, these people who'd gone out, mainly men, but some women, had left society to live as samanas. You know, the samana means somebody who strives for spiritual, or anybody who strives, but in this particular case, it's striving for spiritual attainment. Anyway, when Upaka sees him, he says, "Friend, your faculties are clear. The color of your skin is pure and bright. Under whom have you gone forth? Who is your teacher? Whose Dharma do you profess?" And the Buddha replies in verses, "I am the one who's transcended all, a knower of all, unsullied among all things, renouncing all things, by cravings ceasing freed. Having known this for myself, to whom should I point as my teacher? I have no teacher, and one like me exists nowhere in the world, with all its gods, because I have no person for my counterpart. I am the accomplished one in the world. I am the teacher supreme. I alone am a fully enlightened one, whose fires are quenched and extinguished." That's the fires of greed, hatred, and delusion. "I go now to the city of Kazi," that's Varanasi, "to set the motion, the wheel of the Dhamma. In a world that has become blind, I go to beat the drum of the deathless." That's very impressive, huh? But the Upaka replies, "By your claims, friend, you ought to be the universal victor. The victors are those like me who have won to destruction of the taints." So remember, these are the four basic problems that we have, basic misunderstandings. "I have vanquished all evil states, therefore, Upaka, I am a victor." Now, when this was said, the Ajivaka Upaka said, "Maybe so, friend." Shaking his head, he took a bypath and departed. So I think the Buddha realized this isn't quite the way he was going to spread the Dharma. Now, we also have to accept there's a bit of hagiography here. So hagiography is the story of the saints. And you always build a saint up, you know, legends and myths all surround them, and they become much greater, in a sense, in some ways than they actually were, because of this mythology that surrounds them. So I doubt if he came out with a set of prepared verses. He probably said, you know, that he felt that he knew himself to be fully liberated, but he didn't convince this Ajivaka. Now, that reminds me that when I was living at the Birmingham Buddhist Vihara in Birmingham, they used to come, there's been about the 80s, early, middle 80s, somewhere around about there. We used to get cards and letters from somebody announcing that the next world leader was living in London, somewhere in Pudding Street or something. And I remember picking these up. There about 7 or 8 of them came to my memory, picking them up and thinking, "Oh yeah, just like a Jivaka. Oh yeah, right, okay." And I never got caught up to finding out who this person was. Anyway, he then, of course, is on his way. The Buddha's on his way to see his friend, to see his old friends whom he'd been training with. And let me just read this through. So he wandered in stages and eventually came to Varanasi, Benares, to the deer park at Isipatana. And I approached the group of 5. Now the bhikkhus saw me coming at a distance, and they agreed amongst themselves, "Friend, here comes the recluse Gautama, who lives luxuriously." Remember, he'd given up the path of self-mortification, "who gave up his striving and reverted to luxury. We should not pay homage to him or rise up for him or receive his bowl and outer robe. But a seat may be prepared for him. If he likes, he may sit down." However, as I approached those bhikkhus, they found themselves unable to keep their pact. One came to meet me, took my bowl and outer robe, another prepared a seat, and another set out water for my feet. However, they still addressed me as friend. Whereupon I told them, "Do not address the Tathagata by the name of friend." Tathagata was how he referred to himself. It means the transcendent one. The Tathagata is the accomplished one, a fully enlightened one. Listen, bhikkhus, the deathless has been attained. I shall instruct you, I shall teach you the Dharma. Practicing as you are instructed, by realizing for yourself, here and now, through direct knowledge, you will soon enter into and abide in that supreme goal of the holy life, for the sake of which clansmen rightly go forth from home to homelessness. So that's a very pat phrase, okay, that you get throughout the scriptures. And then he tries to talk to them, of course, about this. And then there's this lovely passage here where 4 or 5, the usual thing is everybody tries 3 times, you see. So on the second time, and then he actually says the same thing a 3rd time. And then he asks them, he says, bhikkhus, bhikkhus, remember, is anybody's list, but here it's his 5 friends. Have you ever heard me speak like this before? See, they said, no, Venerable Sir. Says the Tathagata is the accomplished one, and then he goes through this business. And then he says, I was able to convince the bhikkhus of the group of 5. Then I sometimes instructed 2 bhikkhus, while the other 3 went for alms. And the 6 of us lived on what the other 3 bhikkhus brought back from their alms round. Sometimes I instructed 3 bhikkhus, while the other 2 went on alms, and the 6 of us lived on what those 2 bhikkhus brought back from their alms round. Then the bhikkhus of 5, thus taught and instructed by me, being themselves subject to birth, having understood the danger in what is subject to birth, seeking the unborn supreme security from bondage, nibbana, attained the unborn supreme security from bondage, nibbana. Being themselves subject to aging, sickness, death, sorrow, and defilement, having understood the danger in what is subject to aging, sickness, death, sorrow, and defilement, seeking the unaging, unailing, deathless, sorrowless, and undefiled supreme security from bondage, nibbana, they attained the unaging, unailing, deathless, sorrowless, undefiled supreme security from bondage, nibbana. The knowledge and vision arose in them. Our deliverance is unshakable. This is our last birth. There is no renewal of becoming. So there you have a nice little passage which gives us some idea of his early movements. But of course, they've been sort of souped up a bit with verses and stuff like that. But at least we can sort of get an image of him, of how he walks. I think it's about 500 miles. I've got it somewhere. 250 miles. He walked 250 miles from Bodh Gaya to Sarnath, with the sole purpose of seeking out these old companions whom he felt was, were open enough or developed enough to receive his Dharma. So before, let's see what time. Oh, good, I've got some time. Oh, no, it's not it. 26. Oh, time is passing on, and I did want to read the actual discourse, which is what you might call the root discourse of Theravada. The root discourse of Buddhism, frankly. It's not just Theravada, it's the root discourse, and it's all about the Four Noble Truths. So I'm afraid, because time moves on, I shall have to leave that little delight for tomorrow evening. And I will be getting round to the Eightfold Path sooner